So, the air war in Ukraine has just kicked into a whole new gear. We're seeing this massive, new offensive striking deep inside Russian territory. And, honestly, it's changing the whole dynamic of the conflict. Let's break down what is going on.
Things really took a turn just recently. Ukraine has, and I'm quoting here, unleashed what might be its biggest missile and drone blitz of the entire war. And look, this wasn't just some skirmish on the border. No, this was a coordinated, deep, and incredibly audacious series of attacks.
All right, so what did this blitz actually look like? Let's dig into the sheer scale of these attacks, where they were hitting, and the strategy that seems to be driving the whole thing.
I mean, just look at the distances we're talking about here. These are not frontline targets. We're talking about strikes reaching Kazan, that's 1,000 kilometers, or over 600 miles from Ukrainian-controlled land, hitting a Gazprom facility. Then you've got an oil refinery in Saratov, plus crucial chemical and microelectronics plants in Tula and Bryansk. This really shows a whole new level of capability for Ukraine.
And get this, the number of drones involved was just huge. Russian officials themselves confirmed over 40 drones hit just a few of these spots. The real total? Probably way, way higher. It just goes to show they have the ability to totally saturate and overwhelm local air defenses.
So you're probably wondering, how did they pull this off? Well, it was a really sophisticated mix of weapons. You've got at least 6 American ATACMS missiles and 6 British Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Both are famous for their precision, and they were working together with waves and waves of these long-range drones.
And here's the key part, the strategy. This wasn't random. By going after oil, gas, chemical, and microelectronics facilities, the goal is pretty clear. Ukraine is trying to systematically break down Russia's ability to fuel and supply its war machine, while also hitting warehouses to blow up ammo before it can even get to the front lines.
Okay, so how did Russia respond? As you can probably guess, they hit back with their own massive strikes, escalating what Poland's prime minister has started calling a campaign of air terror all across Ukraine.
And you can see a really clear contrast in what each side is trying to do. While Ukraine is zeroing in on Russia's military-industrial complex, Russia's retaliatory strikes have consistently gone after Ukraine's energy grid, with the goal of causing these massive blackouts for ordinary people.
Now, the sheer intensity of Russia's response had consequences beyond Ukraine. Poland, which is a NATO member, actually had to scramble its own fighter jets. Why? To protect its airspace from Russian missiles that might wander across the border. It's a stark reminder of how easily this conflict could spill over.
But, this whole escalation isn't just happening in the air. Down on the ground, there's been a pretty significant and honestly surprising development, with new foreign troops joining the fight.
And that number, 12,000, that's how many North Korean soldiers have reportedly been sent to fight for Russia. And their presence is having a real impact, especially in the incredibly fierce battles happening around Kyiv.
And the word from the front line is pretty eye-opening. A Ukrainian soldier reported that these North Korean troops, quote, cannot be dismissed. He said they've been fighting well, and that this should be a real concern for both Ukraine and for the West. They're clearly a more capable force than a lot of people might have expected.
But that effectiveness? Wow, it is coming at a brutal, brutal cost. It seems they're being used in the same way as Russia's own troops, as cannon fodder. It's estimated that nearly 4,000 of that initial 12,000 have already been killed or wounded. That's a casualty rate of about 1 in 3. Just staggering.
So, all of these escalations, in the air and on the ground, they bring up some really big strategic questions. So let's try and tackle a few of the most common ones, based on the analysis from our sources.
All right, first up, the one question people have been asking since day one of the full-scale invasion. Why on earth is the Kerch Bridge, Putin's huge symbolic link to occupied Crimea, still standing?
Well, the simple answer is, it's not for a lack of trying. The thing is, modern bridges, especially a monster like this one, are just incredibly tough nuts to crack with missiles. You can poke holes in the road for sure, but to cause a full collapse, that's a whole other ballgame, especially when it's one of the most heavily defended targets on the entire planet. Okay, next question. This one comes up all the time, and it's a sensitive one. Are there any actual plans to send NATO combat troops into Ukraine?
The short, simple, direct answer is no. An unambiguous no. Right now, there are no plans from NATO or its member countries to send soldiers to fight on the front lines.
But, and this is a big but, the real conversation is a bit more nuanced. Some leaders, especially from France and the UK, have floated the idea of sending troops for non-combat roles, way back in the rear. The thinking is they could handle jobs like training or equipment maintenance inside Ukraine. And what would that do? It would free up experienced Ukrainian soldiers to go where they are desperately needed, the front line.
And all of this massive escalation in the air, the new dynamics on the ground, it brings us to the biggest question of all, right? What is the end game here? As this thing gets more and more intense, what are the actual long-term prospects? So let's just imagine for a second. Let's say a ceasefire gets signed tomorrow. Is that the end of it? Or would Russia just use that break to rearm and get ready for round two?
According to the analysis, the answer is, well, it's pretty blunt and it's unequivocal. Absolutely yes. There's really very little doubt that Russia would see any pause in the fighting as just a golden opportunity to rebuild its military for whatever comes next.
And here's exactly why that is. Russia has completely shifted its entire country to a wartime economy. A truly staggering 40% of its whole government budget is now going to security and defense. Their factories are running 24/7, just churning out weapons. A ceasefire isn't going to change that reality overnight.
Which leaves us with this one final and pretty sobering question to think about. With Russia's economy totally geared for war and its factories pumping out weapons, what does a real, lasting peace in Europe even look like anymore? That's the challenge that lies ahead. Thanks for joining me for this breakdown.